Alistair Vance had built his empire on a foundation of absolute control. As the sole owner of the Vance Hospitality Group, his name was synonymous with inaccessible luxury and cutthroat business tactics. He did not tolerate errors, and he certainly did not tolerate the public relations nightmare that his board of directors was currently using to try and oust him. They called him heartless. They said his rigid, elitist approach was damaging the brand's modern image. Alistair needed a miracle to soften his public persona before the quarterly vote, but he never expected to find that miracle shivering in the foyer of his own flagship restaurant. Clara Hayes smoothed down the fabric of her best dress, though she knew it was woefully out of place amidst the silk and diamonds of the other patrons. Beside her, her 7-year-old son, Leo, clutched a small, wrapped birthday present. Clara had saved for 6 months to bring Leo to the Sterling Room, fulfilling a promise she made when his father walked out on them. She just wanted one perfect evening for her boy, but the maitre d', a tall man with a permanent sneer named Gregory, had other plans. "I am sorry, madam, but this establishment maintains a strict standard," Gregory said, his voice dripping with loud, intentional condescension that made nearby heads turn. "You and the child are disturbing the atmosphere. I must ask you to leave immediately." Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she held her ground, tightening her grip on Leo's small hand. "We have a reservation. We are dressed appropriately, and my son hasn't made a single sound. We are paying customers just like everyone else here." Gregory scoffed, stepping closer to physically intimidate her. "A reservation made online, clearly an oversight. The Sterling Room is not a charity soup kitchen. Now walk out the door before I have security escort you to the street." Tears pricked the corners of Clara's eyes, but her pride refused to let them fall. She bent down to pick up her purse, defeated, whispering an apology to her son. But before she could take a single step toward the heavy mahogany doors, a cold, authoritative voice sliced through the dining room, freezing the music and the hushed whispers of the wealthy patrons. "The only person being escorted to the street tonight is you, Gregory." Alistair Vance emerged from the shadows of the private dining alcove. He was dressed in an immaculate dark suit, his jaw clenched, his piercing grey eyes locked onto the trembling manager. The entire room fell into a deathly silence. Everyone recognized the billionaire. "Mr. Vance," Gregory stammered, all color draining from his face. "I was simply enforcing the brand's elite standards. These people clearly do not belong." Alistair walked slowly until he was standing directly between Clara and the manager. He did not look at Clara yet, his focus entirely on destroying the man before him. "The standard of my brand is excellence, not arrogant cruelty. You have publicly humiliated a paying guest and a child. You are fired. Leave your badge on the podium and get out of my building." Gregory opened his mouth to protest, but the lethal stillness in Alistair's expression made him snap his mouth shut. The manager scurried away, humiliated in front of the city's elite. Cell phone cameras were already lowered. Patrons had recorded the entire exchange. Alistair finally turned to Clara. He noticed the cheap but meticulously ironed fabric of her dress, the fierce protective way she shielded her son, and the defiant spark in her hazel eyes. She wasn't looking at him with awe or gratitude. She was evaluating him, sizing up the man who owned the very place that had just tried to throw her out. "Please accept my deepest apologies," Alistair said, his voice softening just enough to be polite. "Your dinner tonight is on the house. Whatever you wish." Clara lifted her chin. "I appreciate the gesture, Mr. Vance, but I don't accept charity. I saved for this dinner and I will pay for it. Come on, Leo, they can find us a table now." Alistair watched her walk away, a strange feeling blooming in his chest. Women did not speak to him that way. People did not refuse his money. Within hours, the video of the ruthless billionaire defending a working-class single mother flooded the internet. By morning, Alistair's public image had transformed from a corporate shark to a compassionate protector. His public relations team was ecstatic, but the board of directors remained skeptical, demanding proof that this wasn't just a staged stunt. That afternoon, Alistair sat in his glass-walled office, staring at the file his private investigator had compiled on Clara Hayes. She was a kindergarten teacher, drowning in medical debt from an illness her late mother had suffered. She was fiercely independent, struggling to keep her head above water after a financial crash 3 years ago. A crash, Alistair realized with a cold knot in his stomach, that had been caused by a corporate takeover initiated by his own company. He pushed the guilt aside, focusing on the problem at hand. He needed the board to believe he was a changed man. He needed them to believe the hero narrative. And to do that, he needed Clara Hayes. Alistair's black town car pulled up to Clara's modest apartment complex that evening. When she opened the door, she was wearing faded jeans and an oversized sweater, a stark contrast to the billionaire standing in her narrow hallway. "Mr. Vance," she said, narrowing her eyes. "If you're here to offer me more free food, the answer is still no." "I'm here to offer you a job, Miss Hayes," Alistair replied, stepping into the small, neat living room without waiting for an invitation. "Or rather, a partnership, one that will solve both of our problems." Clara crossed her arms, refusing to be intimidated by his expensive suit or his commanding presence in her tiny home. "I have a job, and I seriously doubt a man like you has problems that a woman like me can solve." "You would be surprised," Alistair said, pacing the room. "The video from last night went viral. My investors loved it, but my board of directors thinks it was a fluke. They want to oust me. I need them to believe that the compassion they saw last night is real, that I am settling down. I need a fiancé, a public one, someone genuine, someone the public already loves." Clara let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "You want me to pretend to marry you? For a PR stunt? You are out of your mind. Please leave." "I will pay off all your debts," Alistair countered, stopping to look her directly in the eyes. "Every single medical bill your mother left behind. I will set up a trust fund for your son that will guarantee he attends any university he chooses. 6 months of your time attending galas, smiling for the cameras, wearing my ring, and you and Leah will never have to worry about money again." Clara froze. The words hit her like a physical blow. The crushing weight of her debt, the sleepless nights worrying about Leo's future, it could all vanish. She looked at the closed door of Leo's bedroom, then back at the arrogant, calculated man offering her a lifeline wrapped in a lie. 6 months, Clara whispered, her voice trembling slightly before she steeled it with pride. "No physical intimacy, no trying to control my life outside of your events. And you treat my son with absolute respect, or the deal is off." Alistair held out his hand, a triumphant glint in his eye. "We have a deal, Miss Hayes. Tomorrow I will send my driver to bring you to the penthouse. We have a wedding to plan." Clara ignored his hand. "Don't send a driver. I know how to take the subway, Mr. Vance. I'll see you tomorrow." As Alistair left the apartment, he felt a strange rush of adrenaline. He had secured his position, outsmarted his board, and bought himself the perfect alibi. But as he remembered the fierce, unyielding look in Clara's eyes, he realized he might have just invited the only woman capable of breaking him into his perfectly controlled world. The following afternoon, Clara stood in the lavish marble foyer of Alistair's penthouse. The cold, lifeless perfection of the space sent a shiver down her spine. It looked less like a home and more like a museum where nothing was allowed to be touched. Alistair's assistant handed her a massive binder containing the rules of their arrangement, the public backstory they would use, and the schedule of their upcoming appearances. "This is absurd," Clara muttered, flipping through the pages of strict guidelines. "You have literally scripted our first date." "Efficiency is key, Clara," Alistair said, walking down the sweeping glass staircase. "We have an engagement party this weekend. My mother will be there. She is complicated. She will try to break you down to see if you are truly worthy of the Vance name. You must not let her." Clara closed the binder with a loud snap, the sound echoing in the massive room. "I am not afraid of your mother, Alistair. I survived working double shifts while raising a child alone. A wealthy woman with too much time on her hands doesn't scare me." Alistair stopped at the bottom of the stairs, caught off guard by her resilience. For a fleeting second, the armor he wore so tightly seemed to crack, revealing a genuine look of respect. "Good, because this weekend, the entire city will be watching us, and if we fail, I lose my company, and you lose everything." The stage was set, the contract was sealed, but neither of them was prepared for the invisible lines that were already beginning to blur between the performance and the reality of the hearts they had promised to protect. The grand ballroom of the Vance estate was a suffocating sea of diamonds and designer suits. Clara stood by the champagne tower, her posture flawless in a deep emerald gown that Alistair had insisted on purchasing, though she had forced him to deduct the cost from her final payout. She watched as Alistair navigated the room of investors and media elites with the predatory grace of a shark. He was brilliant, ruthless, and terrifyingly charming. But the real danger of the evening was not the press. It was the woman approaching Clara with a smile as cold as winter ice. Eleanor Vance, Alistair's mother, looked Clara up and down with practiced disdain. She held her crystal flute like a weapon. She leaned in, her voice a poisonous whisper meant only for Clara's ears. "I know exactly what you are, Miss Hayes," Eleanor said, her smile never wavering for the cameras flashing across the room. "You are a clever little gold digger who managed to manipulate my son into a publicity stunt. But do not get comfortable in that dress. Once the board vote is secure, you and your fatherless child will be sent back to whatever tragic neighborhood you crawled out of." Clara felt a familiar flash of anger, but she remembered her promise to herself. She would not let these people break her. She turned to Eleanor, her expression perfectly serene. "I am a kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Vance," Clara replied, her voice steady and clear. "I deal with irrational tantrums and unprovoked hostility every single day. If you think your insults intimidate me, you are vastly overestimating your own importance. Now, if you will excuse me, my fiancé is waiting." Alistair had been watching from across the room. He closed the distance between them just in time to hear Clara's flawless dismissal. As Eleanor stormed off, her face flushed with quiet rage, Alistair placed a warm hand on the small of Clara's back. The touch was entirely for the cameras, yet it sent an unscripted jolt of electricity straight through her spine. "She deserved that," Alistair murmured, leaning close so the press would capture what looked like an intimate whisper. "You handled her perfectly, thank you." For the next few weeks, the boundaries of their business arrangement began to warp. Living in the penthouse forced a proximity neither had prepared for. Clara refused the luxury cars and continued taking the subway to her teaching job, a defiance of his wealth that secretly fascinated him. But it was Alistair's interactions with Leo that began to chip away at Clara's defenses. One evening, she came home exhausted, her head throbbing with a migraine, only to find the ruthless billionaire sitting on the expensive living room rug. He had his suit jacket discarded and his sleeves rolled up, patiently helping Leo construct a complicated wooden ship model. When Alistair noticed her standing in the doorway, he did not summon a maid. He quietly walked into the kitchen, brewed her favorite chamomile tea, and placed it in her hands without a single sarcastic remark. It was in these quiet moments that the lines blurred. Clara found herself looking for his grey eyes in crowded rooms, and Alistair found his cold, empty penthouse finally feeling like a home. But the foundation of their relationship was built on a lie, and lies always demand their payment. The collapse happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Clara had gone into Alistair's home office to search for a spare charger. She opened the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk and froze. Inside was a thick file with her name printed on the tab. Curiosity overpowered her restraint. She opened the folder, sifting through the background checks and financial records his investigators had pulled. But then she saw the document that stopped her heart. It was the corporate takeover summary from 3 years ago. The exact hostile acquisition that had bankrupted her mother's employer, seizing their pension funds and plunging Clara's family into insurmountable medical debt. Stamped at the bottom of the aggressive acquisition order was the imposing logo of the Vance Hospitality Group, alongside Alistair's undeniable signature. The air vanished from her lungs. The man who had swooped in to play her savior was the very architect of her family's ruin, and worse, he had known it. He had known exactly who she was when he offered to pay off the debts his own company had caused. When Alistair returned home that evening, expecting to find Clara and Leo in the kitchen, he instead found Clara standing in the center of the dark office. The file was open on the desk. The silence in the room was heavier than stone. "Clara," Alistair started, his voice suddenly stripped of its usual authority as he saw the betrayed, shattered look in her eyes. "I can explain. I did not know until after the restaurant incident. When I found out, I wanted to fix it." "You did not want to fix it, Alistair," Clara said, her voice shaking with a cold, devastating fury. She unclasped the diamond necklace he had given her for the press tour and let it drop onto the desk with a heavy clatter. You wanted to buy my forgiveness without ever having to ask for it. You used my desperation, a desperation you created to save your own reputation. She walked past him, her head held high despite the tears threatening to spill. I will finish the 6 months because I signed a contract, and unlike you, I honor my word. But from this second forward, we are nothing but a business transaction. Do not speak to me unless there is a camera flashing. The weeks that followed were a silent agony for Alistair. The cold shoulder of the board of directors was nothing compared to the absolute freezing indifference Clara now showed him. She performed her role flawlessly in public, smiling for the cameras and holding his hand, but the moment the doors closed, she vanished into her wing of the penthouse. Alistair tried to apologize through actions rather than his checkbook. He cancelled high-profile meetings to make sure he was home when Leo returned from school. He left her favorite flowers on the kitchen counter without a note, but the wall she had built seemed impenetrable. Just as the silence between them reached a breaking point, a new threat emerged from the shadows. Julian Thorne, a bitter rival on the board of directors, who had always coveted Alistair's position, called an emergency meeting at the Vance corporate headquarters. When Alistair and Clara arrived, expecting a routine press update, they found the boardroom packed with hostile executives. Standing at the head of the table, holding a familiar manila envelope, was Julian Thorne, and smiling coldly beside him was Alistair's mother, Eleanor. "We have a problem, Alistair," Julian announced, tossing the envelope onto the polished table. "A very concerned citizen provided me with some fascinating reading material this morning. It outlines a highly illegal fraud against the shareholders of this company. A fraudulent engagement, to be precise, complete with financial payouts and non-disclosure agreements." Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes locked on Clara with triumphant malice. "I told you I would protect this family's legacy from parasites. The press has been notified. They are waiting in the lobby. By the end of the hour, your little charade will be front-page news, Alistair. You will be stripped of your company, and Miss Hayes will be prosecuted for corporate fraud. Checkmate." The silence in the boardroom was heavy, thick with the anticipation of Alistair's ruin. Julian Thorne smiled, a vicious expression of pure triumph, as he waited for the billionaire to crumble. But Alistair did not flinch. Instead of defending himself, he took a step forward, deliberately placing himself between Clara and the hostile executives. "You have always been thorough, Julian," Alistair said, his voice deadly calm, echoing against the glass walls. "But you have always suffered from a fatal lack of vision. You think this contract is my downfall. In reality, it is the only thing that kept me distracted while my investigators finished looking into your private accounts." Julian's smile faltered. Eleanor shifted uncomfortably, her cold confidence suddenly cracking. Alistair reached into his tailored jacket and retrieved a small, sleek black folder, tossing it onto the table right next to Julian's envelope. "While you were busy stealing a private document from my home, Mother, I was busy tracking the missing pension funds from the hostile takeover 3 years ago. The same takeover that ruined Clara's family. You see, the board always blamed me for the ruthless nature of that acquisition, but the financial trails in that folder prove that Julian authorized the illegal asset stripping and funneled the pensions into his offshore accounts." The boardroom erupted into frantic whispers. The executives snatched the black folder, their eyes widening as they read the undeniable proof of Julian's embezzlement. "This is a lie," Julian stammered, the color draining from his face as he backed away from the table. "This is a desperate fabrication to save your own skin." "The authorities do not think so," Alistair replied, checking his watch. "In fact, federal agents are waiting for you in the lobby right next to your precious press corps. You are finished, Julian. You are no longer a board member, and by tonight you will be a prisoner." Julian looked around frantically, but the executives who had supported him mere minutes ago were now turning their backs, distancing themselves from the toxic fallout. Defeated and humiliated, Julian was escorted out of the room by corporate security, his career and reputation destroyed in an instant. Alistair then turned to his mother. "And you," he said, his voice stripped of any familial warmth, "I invited a parasite into my company just to ruin the only woman who has ever challenged me to be a better man. Your access to the estate, the accounts, and my life is permanently revoked. Leave." Eleanor opened her mouth, but the icy finality in her son's eyes silenced her. She gathered her designer coat and walked out, her head bowed in disgrace. With the room cleared of threats, Alistair turned to face the remaining board members. "The contract is real," he admitted, his voice steady. "I arranged it to secure my position, but I am stepping down as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. I will retain my shares, but I refuse to lead a company that prioritizes profit over human lives. I'm going to spend my time fixing the damage this corporation has done, starting today." Before the board could react, Alistair walked over to Clara. He gently took her hand, leading her out of the suffocating boardroom and into the quiet sanctuary of his private office. Once the heavy doors closed, the invincible billionaire finally let his guard down. He looked at Clara, his grey eyes filled with a vulnerability he had never shown another living soul. "I am so sorry, Clara," Alistair whispered, his voice thick with raw emotion. "I thought I could buy my way out of the guilt. I thought I could control everything, but I could not control how entirely I fell in love with you. I do not care about the company, the board, or my reputation. I only care about you and Leo. You do not have to forgive me, but I need you to know that the man standing before you is yours. No contracts, no lies, just me." Clara looked at him, searching his face for any trace of the arrogant businessman she had met at the restaurant. Instead, she found a man who had just thrown away his entire empire to protect her and correct a wrong. The walls she had built around her heart finally began to crumble. "You are a fool, Alistair Vance," Clara said softly, a tear slipping down her cheek as she reached up to rest her hand against his jaw. "A complete fool. But you are trying, and for the first time I believe you." He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes, and then kissed her. It was not a performance for the cameras or a calculated move to secure a vote. It was a desperate, tender promise, a silent vow to spend the rest of his life making things right. 1 year later, the sprawling gardens of the Vance estate were filled with the sound of children laughing. Clara stood on the stone terrace, watching as Leo chased a golden retriever puppy across the pristine lawn. Beside him, Alistair was laughing, his suit jacket discarded on the grass, looking entirely at peace. They had not returned to the cold, corporate world. Instead, Clara had opened a foundation dedicated to supporting families affected by corporate greed, fully funded by Alistair's personal wealth. The penthouse had been sold, replaced by a warm, chaotic home filled with love, toys, and honesty. Alistair walked up the terrace steps, wrapping his arms around Clara from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. He kissed her temple, watching their son play in the afternoon sun. He had lost his absolute control, but in return he had found his humanity. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear a good story about redemption and true love. Subscribe to the channel to follow along with our upcoming stories, and we will see you next time.